All right, go ahead.
Welcome to the 2:30 p.m. session in track number 3. Here to share their spreadsheets to automation stories are Deanne from the University of Hawaii and David from Wayne State University. We'll begin with the University of Hawaii. The stage is yours, Deanne.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Deanna Pasternak. I'm the lead at the University of Hawaii for a group called Managed Services. Our team sells resources, VMs, to different customers that want to purchase resources, and we charge based on physical resources like the CPU, RAM, and disk storage. So the new beginning for us is we finally have an automated billing system that we were able to leverage Sharewell for. So the problem we were trying to solve is that our customers request virtual servers, and the work was spread over different groups. There are also multiple different forms to complete using different technologies. We had an HTML page and we had a Google form, both requiring different information, because over time, as our process matured, it just made more sense to do the separate processes. So it was a little confusing for our customers, not knowing which form they needed to fill out and which information goes where. Billing was also not performed on a consistent cycle. Customers were billed from the day that they got their virtual server, which was difficult from a billing perspective, being that you're billing 200 customers all throughout the year. So there's also the problem of, for the intake of the request, what the customer would put in, and the resource modification, everything is manual, as I mentioned before. You'd have to send an email to my group. We'd have to create an SR, and the other team that adds the resources would add it. So customers didn't have a good idea of the resources that they have for their servers unless they actually ask us. Over the years, due to the addition of security requirements, like I mentioned, there was 2 processes. At first, we were just asking, how much CPU do you want? How much RAM? But over time, we started asking questions like, what type of server are you using? Are you using a SQL server? Are you going to have a database? Because all of these servers live in our data center. So we wanted to have a good idea if we need to notify people for vulnerabilities, since these are all managed 100% by the departments. If we knew that they had things like an Exchange server and there was a vulnerability, we could notify them. Before this process, we really didn't have a good idea. If you were to ask us, how many IIS servers, it would be really difficult to find that information. Customers also, like I said, lacked visibility in what they're paying for and which resources they have. Throughout the year, we'd get a lot of questions, can you let me know how much disk storage I have, or how much RAM total if it wasn't all presented to the server at once. The information was also stored in various places, including staff brains, email, spreadsheets. We had so many spreadsheets with different information that was required from different groups. Which servers are charged, which servers are have this amount of RAM, which are SATA, which are SAS, which have personally identifiable information on it. So it was a lot of different resources that you had to go to find information about a server. One of the newest things that we've had are different SLAs and MOAs. And in the traditional process, customers were not forced to acknowledge that they read the policies in terms of service, which we were able to change by leveraging Sharewell for our billings solution. So as part of our fix, our new workflow with Sharewell, using it for the intake of the system, it allows us to it allows for electronic permission for the billing team to take payment. So by virtually signing that you are accepting this, the team was able to charge for the resources without actually having to have paper. The server intake process also serves as a record that customers can go into the Sharewell portal and view their historical documentation of any change requests. It also shows the approval of purchases. Since there's real money involved here, we want to make sure that only an approved person can add resources to a VM since they're paying for it. And customers are very clear on what resources they're paying for because we have a trail of when it was requested and that it was indeed requested by them. So it also enabled us to move the billing process to a yearly standard cycle, which is really beneficial to the billing team. The billing team is a separate team from my team. So we work very close with them, but my team doesn't actually handle the billing. Having them be able to do it yearly at the end of the fiscal year helps with the, just making everything a lot simpler, and it allows them to have the process streamlined. The billing is now automated with account codes. Instead of people writing checks and us having to follow up on making sure the checks and making sure they paid, they can just take the money from an account code, which really streamlines the process. The administrative groups doesn't have to process checks. Like I said, checks don't have to be cut at all, and we just take the money that they had already approved when they ordered the resources. There's also one central location for their billing records and a history of any change requests that they have made. So I will show you some screens of actually the process. Some of the lessons that we learned along the way is, this, like I mentioned, this process was two different teams were involved in this project. Make sure that you're using the same terminology before you begin. One of the things that just department was used differently between the billing team and my team. The billing team uses it as the higher level department to take the money from. And for us, department could have been used anything, the grant name, the project that it was under. And so, we wanted to make sure going into it, we found out that some of our terminology wasn't the same, and we had to adjust the process in order to make it work for every team that was involved. Making sure that you're trying to solve the same problem or at least understand the workflow. The billing was recently taken over by the billing team, so they were just learning how to do the billing process. And we had to work very close together to see how they were going to change it from the historical spreadsheets. We used to bill actually by a shared Google sheet, and then they would pay by a check. So we had to make sure that we're solving the same problem with our process. And being able to thoroughly translate every step of the process into written steps was key. There were some steps that along the way, whenever you've been doing this for so long, you don't even realize that it's a step that needs to happen. It's just so automatic. So being able to translate it into written steps is really important. Also, testing by different groups is imperative. We had, people in our help desk test it just to make sure that it made sense. We didn't actually have any end users test it, which might be something in the future that would have been very useful. Just on the essence of time, we stuck to different groups in the department, and they were able to tell us, like, this doesn't make sense, or the terminology is a little off. So that was really helpful for us. So this is the screenshot of the server intake. And as you can see, now you have to acknowledge the SLA and the MOA before you can click submit at the top. So this is really important because they have to actually forces you to click on that URL and to acknowledge it, so that there's no confusion over if they are paying or not. And on the form, the form is very long. I'm not going to show the entire form, but this just shows all of the billable items, type like CPU, RAM, and different resources, and it automatically adjusts. Like I mentioned, for security purposes, we don't have it specific to specific software packages, but at least we know how many web servers and file servers and application servers are out there now, because they have to choose one or multiple. And this is just, an idea of, I mentioned we had a second process for security, and they have to acknowledge some of these things. And there's more questions. This is just an idea of it. And that's all I had.
All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen here. So do we have it up there?
We do now.
Yes.
Yes, no. Okay. So my name is David Foote. I'm with Wayne State University. And we went through a similar process a couple of years ago and have had it in production. So we're the new hope for University of Hawaii. They can get to where we are with their process. So to set the stage a little bit, 7 years ago, we consolidated all desktop support to central IT. And those units that we were now providing support with were required to pay for in-warranty computers. So we had a 4-year warranty included every year with their payment of support. They received desktop support and reasonably unlimited out-of-warranty computers. So if they needed extras for student assistants or temp workers or kiosks, we would provide that. And then this billing cycle was done once a year. And then every time we did that, we renegotiated those number of paid computers. So someone would say, well, we added a new department, we're going to be adding on 10 new computers. Okay, we'll charge you for that next year. Or we're removing a number of people. This department got moved over to somewhere else, which happens more often than you'd expect. And so there's that once a year kind of true up where we all had to sit down and agree what the number should actually be. So the problem with this setup was that it was really too reliant on spreadsheets, right? So getting the data for this spreadsheet was a yearly process. They started a couple months beforehand where they were looking at all of our inventory data, which was in a CMDB in our previous ITSM tool. But then it only had limited person information, right? So what unit is this associated with? Who's the billing person for this unit? That was all kind of stored in people's head. And so there was a lot of compiling that needed to be done, lots of data dumps that were then pulled back into Excel, and it could be very overwhelming, and it was a time-consuming process. And also customers had really no way to see what they had agreed upon. They didn't know what they had out there in the field currently. They had an email someplace maybe where they said, you know, they had their initial agreement back when we consolidated, but past that, it was just kind of an email and it wasn't really an official, easy for them to see any of that kind of data. So how did we actually go about improving this process? And that was really, we took something that we were already using, which was our CMDB, and we really turned it into the source of truth. So instead of just storing inventory data, right, like it's this serial number, it's this primary user, and its warranty data is this, we kind of made it an actual asset management database. So we started pulling in all of that organizational unit. We made contracts in our tool, and we stored things like who actually approves for these particular units. What subunits are they responsible for? Who is the overall owner of this? And also, really importantly, how many computers should they have? How many did they agree upon to actually pay for? Because we certainly don't want to be giving them something for free, but we also don't want them to be paying for something that they're not getting. If we don't have enough for them, that's a problem as well. And it also let us store a lot more intelligible data about the state of the computer. So we use a fairly complex set of criteria to determine whether or not we should bill a customer for a computer. Big one being, is it billable? And then, or I'm sorry, is it in warranty? Is it, how far away from the fiscal year are we where it goes out of warranty, right? It's not just, is it in warranty this very second? Is it in warranty, will it be in warranty for the entirety of this fiscal year? Who purchased the computer? Did they decide that next time around they actually don't want to replace this computer? So that's stuff that would be very difficult to kind of figure out on the fly, but as it's stored in the system, we can automate all of that. And we just get these little check boxes that says, yes, they need to pay for it, or no, they don't. It's one of our trickle down out of warranty computers. And then we also, it allows us to use approvals and further automation with some of our deployment tools to drive really critical data like that agreed upon number of computers. No person can actually go ahead and edit that data. That has to be driven by an approval process. Someone submits a service request to say they want a new computer. that will trigger an approval to the appropriate person on the contract. When they approve it, the system goes back and it bumps that number up by 1. The deployment tools look at that number. If there is space, it will allow a tech to deploy a computer. If there is no space, it says, I'm sorry, you can't deploy this. You're going to screw up billing. You need to figure out what's going on. So that automation coupled with the contracts really has let us be successful in this. So we did learn some lessons as we went through the process of building this out, as well as what we've seen over the past couple of years. And the one, it's really hard to move people away from unhelpful terminology, because what you're really doing is you're kind of rebuilding their process and you're making them think about how they should do this in a separate way. And if you're reusing terms that they have been using for years, but trying to get to think them in new ways, it's not necessarily going to work out great. So refreshable, which I have here, was an attribute, it was a process, and it was a time of year. So all of those things combined, we had to kind of do away with anything besides the process and come up with new terms like billable to make it actually make sense to those folks. You also have to think about your customers here. And generally, you're going to have some customers that are incredibly involved in this process. They're very tightly managing their numbers, how much they're going to owe you. And so they really want to be able to see exactly what they owe at any point in time. And then there's other customers that are just like, I'll take care of it when it comes up. And it's much better to build out systems that satisfy those people that love data rather than the reverse. And finally, if there are any kind of pieces of data that are crucial to your billing, so for us, for example, warranty information and who originally purchased the computer are two very, very crucial pieces of data. You really have to understand the security requirements, because if something is so automated, you don't want a human going in there and kind of poking around at it and causing issues. So this was definitely a lesson learned. We kind of had to come back later and tighten everything up. We said, if this is going to be automated, that people are really going to be able to just grab data out of the system. We don't want anything being messed up. So we need the audit trail, and better than not, just not let them modify any of those pieces of information. And so what we get, something that we end up with, this is our contract view. So this is a live view at any point of time. This is inside for our directors inside of IT. The customers have a very similar view though. So we can see at any one point how many people for every single contract we have, which represents departments or sub-departments, how many computers they have, how many they're going to pay for. I've blocked out how much that money will actually be, how many they have that they're just extra and they're not paid for. And then importantly also, because this is part of the asset management process, how many we're going to replace in this current fiscal year. So then we have additional contact details there, like who approves things, who is just there, needs to be informed. And then you can see some of the pieces of information about the actual devices down there at the bottom. So that's too much for this view, but if you were an individual BAO or business affairs officer who is responsible for paying this money, it's very helpful to see who in your unit is actually using what computer. Do they need it, one that is in warranty and is that they have to pay for, or can they get away with a cheaper one that is an out of warranty one that is free? So with that, I'm done with my part there, Vernon. I don't know if we had any questions that came up.
We didn't have any questions that I saw that came in, but I appreciate your presentation. Very, very well done. And due to a little bit of a snafu in scheduling, we are back-to-back sessions. So we're probably going to have to go right in. Feel free, I don't know if David or the other presenters will be able to meet us up in the cafe after this next session, but we do plan on opening that up. If you feel free to come on over there, and we'll watch for that announcement after the next session. So thanks again for your presentation. Loved every minute of it, and we'll kind of jettison right into the next one just because of that 5-minute snafu that we didn't have in the schedule. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Excellent. Todd, are you ready to just roll right into IT service costing?